Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and today we're talking about the macro environment. We have news from a lot of different states on the action that they are taking, so I want to review that. And then we also have some news on Tesla's Gigafactory 1 in Nevada. So Tesla stock on the day today did finish down just slightly, 0.03% to $427.53 to close the week. That compared to the NASDAQ, which was down 3.8%. So as we've been talking about, the continuation of further and further locking down of the economy continues to be taking place. We have news from California last night that they are ordering shelter in home for all 40 million residents of the state, essentially extending the action that we had previously seen taken in places like San Francisco. So California, obviously the most populous state in the United States. That's more than 10% of the population. New York taking similar action. As of 8 p.m. on Sunday, they will be closing all non-essential businesses as well, exempting financial institutions, retailers, pharmacies, hospitals, news media, manufacturing plants, and transportation companies, among others. They're also ordering people to keep 6 feet of distance in public, and all social gatherings are banned. We're seeing similar action from Illinois. They are closing all non-essential businesses as of 5 p.m. Saturday, March 21st. Pennsylvania also taking similar action, as well as Nevada shutting down all non-essential businesses. So with the Gigafactory, we'll obviously come back to the Nevada point in a little bit. But across these 5 states, that's about 90 million people in population, so about 27% of the United States population now in these non-essential business shutdowns. Not necessarily a lockdown state as of yet, but eking closer and closer. 4 of those states, California, Texas, New York, and Pennsylvania, make up 4 of the 6 most populated states in the US. The other 2 are Texas and Florida. And we've now seen them take action to close bars and restaurants with the exception of takeaway and delivery. Next week is going to be an interesting week, and I know interesting is not the right word here, but it's going to be interesting because there's a time delay here for cases and for the impact of these restrictions that we're seeing put in place. So we're now at the strictest point of restrictions that we've been, but those actions don't actually benefit anything for a couple more weeks. And next week, we're going to continue to see case counts rise. We're going to continue to see death count rise. And even with these new restrictions in place, we're still, as a country, not as restricted as other countries have been that have been able to curtail the spread. So as those case counts rise, I don't see any way that restrictions don't also rise in tandem. The obvious question and consideration that raises is what is the economic impact of that and what are the fallout effects of that economic impact? So Goldman Sachs came out with a note on this, I think earlier last week, saying they expect a 5% drop in the US GDP in the second quarter. They've now revised that. So the Huffington Post covered this. They say, quote, "In an analysis released Friday, economists with the major bank revised their previous forecast of a 5% drop in US GDP for the second quarter, April through June, to a 24% drop, citing expected declines in manufacturing activity and services consumption. If that materializes, it would be historic. In modern history, the largest quarterly decline in US GDP was a 10% drop in the first quarter of 1958, end quote. So I don't know that I have to add a lot more context to that. I mean, previous largest drop, 10%, this forecasted to be a 24% drop. Obviously, we'll have to see if that comes to fruition, but that's a huge, huge impact, and hopefully it carries a lot of pent-up demand with it, and once things start to normalize, a lot of that money comes back into the economy. But it doesn't just happen like that. You don't just flip a switch and, okay, that 24% drop equates to a 24% rise in Q3 or something like that. There are real economic consequences that cannot simply be postponed to a later point in time. Let's look at the example of department stores. So previously in my career, I worked in the corporate office for a department store, doing financial planning, inventory management, things like that. And over the last few days, we've had reports from multiple retailers about store closings. So we've heard from Macy's, we've heard from Kohl's, we've heard from other retailers like Apple, announcing the closing of all their stores for multiple week periods. That has a huge impact, especially in the case of department stores, where a lot of the merchandise they have is seasonal in nature. So when you have seasonal merchandise, even a few weeks shift in the time period can cause devastating impacts to your financial plan for that merchandise. Because when you come back, you're already short those 3 weeks, but you still have all that stock that's built up ready to sell. And what you need to end up doing then is just selling it on clearance to anybody that will take it, since that time shift has caused it to now be late in the peak selling season for whatever seasonal category that is. Then you also have the built up stock from your previous season that maybe had just gone to clearance. That's now sitting there, and that's going to have to be further marked down. And then to cover the lack of demand that you have for these few weeks, you need to start canceling orders. So you need to put a lot of pressure on your suppliers. Your suppliers all feel this impact to down channel. Every business that carries inventory is going to be experiencing this impact to widely variable degrees, for sure. But the point is that the impact is there, and it's not simply solved by pent-up demand. For a lot of businesses, not being able to sell for a few week period of time can destroy the entire year. I wouldn't be very surprised if we see a lot of businesses try to report adjusted earnings, factoring out the impact of this period of time. Not trying to be overly negative, but I just want to get some of my thoughts out there on some of these things that people may not necessarily be thinking about right now. So the other thing I wanted to mention on the macro environment, Ray Dalio's fund, Bridgewater, they also announced a forecast. They're forecasting $4 trillion in lost revenues in the United States because of all of this, and a $12 trillion loss in revenue worldwide. And again, hopefully some of that is pent up and will come back later on, but it's not going to be all of it. Now, when we think about how this applies to Tesla, I think it's mostly an application of the macro environment and the environment that Tesla has to work in from a stock perspective. I think fundamentally, Tesla's got a really clear path to a very solid recovery. Demand is obviously one of the key questions that comes back much more into focus than it had been the last few months before all this started. We're already starting to see those questions pop up, especially now that Tesla has released quite a bit of inventory available in the United States here at the end of the quarter. But thankfully, as a smaller player, Tesla's got a lot of market to grow into, even if that market is contracting due to recessionary-like impacts. Definitely a topic that we'll keep a close eye on, we'll continue to talk about in the future. As it relates to the stock, I continue to say, and I'll continue to say for a long time, the two most important elements are demand and profitability. In terms of production, let's come back to Nevada. As I mentioned at the opening, they've ordered all non-essential businesses to close. Nevada's governor said, quote, "There should be no confusion. There's none in my mind. This is not the time to try to find loopholes. If your business is not essential to providing sustenance for the everyday safety, health, and well-being of Nevadans, you must shut down so that we can give healthcare workers and our fellow citizens the best chance at fighting this virus that we can." End quote. So it doesn't sound great in terms of Tesla's prospects, but they do offer a very clear list, and on that clear list, they have as allowed to stay open logistics and supply chain companies, including warehousing, storage, and distribution, which clearly the Gigafactory would fall under. So while I don't believe we've got a statement on this from Tesla yet, I think under this order, Tesla could still operate. However, we heard from Panasonic today that Panasonic is actually going to be shutting down their portion of operations at Gigafactory Nevada. In a statement today, Panasonic said, quote, "The Panasonic factory in Sparks, Nevada will begin ramping down operations early next week and will then close for 14 days. Employees impacted by the closure will receive full pay and benefits for the 14-day period. In the meantime, Panasonic has enacted several measures to enhance the cleanliness of the facility, encourage social distancing, and enable simple and safe, effective behaviors. During the 14-day period, the facility will undergo intensive cleaning." End quote. Panasonic employs about 3,500 employees at Gigafactory 1, so obviously pretty impactful news here, and possibly limits Tesla's ability to carry forward with their own production at Gigafactory 1 at this point in time. And suppliers were one of the major factors with the Fremont decision as well. Elon on Twitter today discussed this in response to a tweet saying, quote, "Tip for Elon Musk, if you actually follow through on manufacturing ventilators, your factories will become essential businesses that must stay open." Elon replied, quote, "That won't work for our auto parts suppliers, so no, our US factory can't stay open." End quote. So as we talked about yesterday, even though Gigafactory 1 at that point in time could remain open, and at this point in time can remain open, the outlook continues to become dimmer and dimmer over the next few weeks. Won't be too surprised if Gigafactory 1 goes the way of Fremont as well, and just decides to mostly shut off production and use this time to hopefully retool and come back better than ever before when production can start up again. Again, to be clear, they still can produce, it's just going to be more challenging now without Panasonic. So not the most fun way to wrap up the week here, but I hope everybody does have a good weekend and takes some time to appreciate the good things that we do still have in life. At least while all this is happening, we can still socialize over the internet, talk to friends, spend some time reaching out maybe to someone that you haven't for a long time. this is a perfect opportunity to reconnect. But as always, guys, thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast. And I'll see you on Monday for the March 23rd episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.